Zoom recording. Make sure I'm recording. Cool. Hello. So yeah, I was just telling Holly before I started hit record. I'm a little bit behind today just because my computer decided to do a big update, and so I'm just a slight behind on everything. So I didn't get a look at anything or read the comments yet, but I got all the files organized so I could just open them up as I go forward doing it. So I might go a little bit longer than an hour just because I didn't get to prep myself for everything. But with that being said, I'll just move forward. Holly's first since she's on the call, and then I'll just go in order from there. The project file. Hopefully nobody had any problem with anything. The project. No. 3, Holly. Arraignment. I'll go through the arraignment points first, just because sometimes I don't even recommend have people turn this in sometimes. It's more just a preference. Yeah, so it looks like you got it working correctly. I don't know if you actually tested it out to see how it works and everything. So when I usually do this, if it's a character that I'm going to do just a one-time, one-off character, I only add it as I go. So if I like, oh, I need it for like a belt, I'll add it, or for pants. But most of the time, I'll just make it work without these. So this is more of a preference. Some people like to make this in the beginning, so they have it, so it's a little bit easier. But otherwise, yeah, it all depends on your preference. You'll get used to it. Some people love it. Some people don't care for it. I personally find it redundant when there are on the back and the front. I would typically put one on the head, one for the belt area, one for the upper and lower arm. I probably wouldn't put one on the back. And then yeah, the leg, the upper leg and the lower leg. It depends. You could always add more as you go. So if you need one for like a belt strap on the leg, it might make it easier. Same with goes the arm. But otherwise, yeah. I think it's good to know how to do it, but I don't think it's necessary on always doing it. But that's just my preference. So cool. Cool. That was it for that. That usually goes fairly fast. All right. First outfit. Yay. I'm going to turn down some colors just so I can see folds better. So don't worry, I'm not intentionally changing everything. I just want to see everything as it is. Where's my reference image? Move that out of the way for now. So yeah, first going over the dress. This is one way to lay out a dress. There's several different ways you could do it. You could do it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think mine with my tutorial was 7, might have been 8. You could do it in 1. You could do it in 2, 3. You could do it as many as you want, depending on the seam line you want or how it will come out with a pattern. If you notice, a typical thing that you'll notice in clothing, the higher the tier, the like more expensive or more fashiony an outfit is, you'll see that seams line up better with each other. So if there's a specific pattern, like a flower pattern on it, on a seam line, the pattern will seamlessly transition from one pattern, one clothing pattern from the other. They'll line it up correctly. That takes a little bit more time and effort on the time when they design the clothing. But on lower tier quality clothing, you'll see stuff that doesn't line up at all. It'll line up horizontally with vertical patterns, or they'll just look just jammed in there. You'll see exactly where the clothing seam is. So that's just a quick note to do when you're making clothing. Just keep that in mind. Older time clothing probably doesn't line up just because they didn't care. It was more or less just getting the basic silhouette and shape at the time. But Probably like royalty would have a better understanding of this, maybe. It's just something I noticed. It's not a huge thing to keep in mind. It just depends on if you're going to take stuff forward, making clothing pattern. This would be hard to line up everything one-to-one, but yeah, I just want to throw that out there. Oops, let me pull this back. Boom, 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 boom. So yeah, my first assignment for the women clothing, it was more or less, I find this type of dress pattern is easier than making for a male, just because you have pants, belt. I put a strap on the next week's assignment. It makes it a little bit more complicated. I found out the female was a little bit easier just because the dress is fairly simple to make. It was just understanding how to make the cloth and stitching them together. Everybody that turned in their assignment, the quick glance I did do, everything came out pretty nice. So I don't really have much comments on most of it. Sometimes the one thing I usually try to tell people, which this one looks pretty good, on the core set, it's hard to get it to line up perfectly down the middle. In a way, you could use the purple. It's not pink anymore. It used to be the pink shirt. It's the, I never remember the name of it. Where is it? Where is it? Is it this one? I think it's this one. Nope. This one. So I don't know if I went over this yet in the week. It might be week 4 assignment. This will pin stuff. So say for the belt, I would grab these lines wherever the seam line is, and this basically pins it to where it is. So if you move this now, these pins, you can't see it that well, they'll all move together. So this will be an easy way to make sure that stuff stays fairly accurate to where you want to place it. Just because you want to keep it straight down the middle, just because if you're doing it for a video game, you're going to want to mirror the torso or mirror specific parts of the character. So that'd be a typical reason why I would do something like that. But it looks pretty good. It's pretty solid. The way I did stitching in the video was very hackily. It wasn't the most efficient way to do it. It was just the way I was able to do it back in the day when they didn't have all the new features and stuff. Because I would just put them in there just so I get the pinching and the folds here, which you don't have right now because you don't have those stitching in there. But the idea was just to get those tension folds right on the where the stitches go. It adds a little bit more interest and makes it a little bit cooler. But back in the day, I would just add those, delete them, then high poly model them in. But I already had the folds where I want them. It's just I had to add the string manually. Nowadays, you have all the new features up there where you might be able to do a little bit better. On the torso, the breast area came out really nice. You got the folds looking really good here. I don't have much to say about that. I'm just going to turn on the light. I don't see the back of the character yet. Oh. I want to see if anybody used this. How do they go through now? So this is one thing I noticed on a lot of stuff in Marvelous. When there is tight tension, I believe tighter tension here. Yeah, you'll see when it gets really tight red tension, it'll typically feel just flat in the area. That's something I personally would kind of just add a little bit texture or noise in ZBrush afterwards, just to give it a little bit more cloth feeling to it, just because it feels very perfect and very stiff or very simple. So that's something I would change afterwards. Yeah, I like that you did the collar, just because that's one thing I wanted to show, how to do collars, how to do the folding thing and stuff like that. This shirt obviously is shows more of the collarbone and the chest. The shirt was from the other reference. Did I have the other reference? Aha! I thought I only had that one. All right, there we go. There we go. Cool, that helps. I was going to comment on the seam line, but it does seem like the seam line is down there, but I think that's a detail seam line, and there's another seam there. I think that's what happened. I think because they're basically making this a little bit thicker of cloth on the arm, and right where it's stitched in here, this is a little bit thinner to give it all these folds up here. But you only have the one seam line. Because I was going to say, it's usually a seam line around the shoulder, which is nice. But that's very minor. Like you said, you had to turn down particle distance because of the file size was too big, and that's probably true. Particle distance, let me put it to 10. If I didn't say it in the videos, which I think I did, when you see something red in the menu here, that means everything that is selected has different settings set to it. That's why it's orange. So now when I reselect it, it's not orange because I set everything to 10 particle distance. Let me simulate really quick. I just want to see if it was smooth out. So yeah, the idea of the fold, yeah, you did. I should have just left it frozen. So the idea of the collar was just to show how to make the angle fold down. So it just was a little, it was just something I want to show in the Marvelous, because the idea of this course is just getting the basic understanding of all the features, and that's why I just threw it in there. It wasn't my favorite color, but this actually works better because you got a better reference for the shirt. I might turn off the seam line here unless this is stitched in. Not stitched in. I don't remember how. Oh, yeah, because this wasn't stitched in there. Oh no, it is. Yeah, this would just be something I would just turn off the fold right in here. You can kind of see it, but I think it looks better without it personally. I think you got everything. All the folds look good. So the one last thing I usually tell people, at least for video games again, right where the arm bends at the elbow, sometimes I try to fudge around or fake it with the adding pins just to get some folds in this area, because your character is never going to walk around with their arms stiff. They're going to be more bent or a little bit more angled and have a little bit more life to them. So when the character animates with a long vertical fold down it, it looks odd when the character bends. So this is just something typical from experience you just want to try to avoid, and you just alter just enough so it doesn't look so stiff when it's bent into a L shape like this reference image. Obviously, I assume if you had more time, I would model in the little stitches down here, put this apart, and have the strings hanging down. It would be a little bit nicer. But yeah, adding the horizontal folds, this goes for the knees. Usually I'll mention that also in the male character when you get to that. But that's also something to keep in mind. I think that's it on this. It came out pretty nice. It took way too long reviewing one assignment, but hopefully the other stuff will go faster. And let me look really quick at your work over here. That was my May, so just ignore that. The arm's nice. I like how you round this out at the end, which is good. Yeah, you gave a lot more cloth. Sometimes even at the end afterwards, I would take this and where was it? Even after simulation, I think you could do it. I don't know if I did the wrong edge. Yep, I did the wrong edge. No. Sometimes afterwards, I would just take this, move this down, just to cut off the extra cloth. So when you pull in ZBrush or anything, you have a little bit more leeway on that. Ignore everything I just wrote down. Or you could add an internal line and split at the line so you get a clean cut and nothing gets modified. And then you can use the same pins I showed up here and just pin those, where you cut it, pin it, and then it'll be fine for simulation again, and you don't have all this extra garment that you don't need. So like this idea here, this is basic idea where from just reframing the first time with the tablecloth, just adding a little touch of detail on the end. It's all the stuff at the very end. And once you get the basic forms in there, hopefully everybody understood that by now. You could go forward with just adding details on top of details, and it's easy to add details onto a pretty solid base. So that's another reason why I try to have you guys save out increments of it, where before you add in details, before you add in specific folds and stuff. Just because if you need to make another clothing pattern similar to the one you're creating now, you could open up maybe your version 1 of it and then just modify it from there. Same goes for shirts, pants, whatever. If you have a little library of these simple files, it'll save you some time, and you'll be able to put more time into detailing it and getting the folds how you want it. But overall, yeah, I think I'm great. I don't really have much to say about that, just those small minor notes. Good job, Holly. Oh, well. All right. And like always, if you want to stick around, stay around, do whatever you want. I'm just going to go forward and reviewing everybody else's homework. I don't know about Kevin's homework because Kevin, I still have your stuff from last week and week 3, so there's nothing to review. So I just want to point that out. I'm going to review. Oh, I can't review that now. That'll take time. Let me do this one first. Danny. And you have 1 reference image and address 1, address 2. Decrease the stitching. Let me look at your file first before I say anything. And address 1. So you're asking about decreasing the stitching line on the button line. I don't get what you mean by stitching on the button line. I sometimes try to just turn off the avatar because it's distracting. So if you have clipping issues with stuff, sometimes it's good just to make one solid thing, make the share first and freeze it, then do the second layer on the second piece on top. You could export different files and then you could import them all in the same scene at once, and then set the layering issues if you need more PC power. And Holly, you're welcome. Yeah, the layering the layer ordering, like I said last week, was they modified it. Every version of Marvelous from 2.5 or 3 to 6 or 7, it kept changing. So I don't know what they're at on the latest one, if it's the same, but they modified it so many times I lost track. I always like the layering feature, but not everybody uses it. They never got it working correctly, so that was also a reason why. Clipping issues were always an issue in Marvelous. So if you notice when you undo, I just want to point this out, when you undo something, it'll turn off your simulation, just because back in the day when you undo, when you're still in simulation mode, your mesh sometimes exploded and your whole thing was ruined and corrupted. So my guess is instead of fixing it, they just put a solution in where they just turn off simulation, and that's why you have it like that. I got a little sidetracked, but I'm just throwing out the stuff that I remember. But there's decrease the stitching on the bottom line. In terms of, is there a way to decrease the stitching? I assume you want to decrease the stitching around here, but I don't know what you mean decrease the stitching. I'm not 100% sure on your question, so I'm going to try to answer it as best I can. So this is an area where either I would modify the pattern to give you a little bit more room, a little bit more leeway of room here, so that the tension isn't so tight. I'm trying to put on tension view mode. So you can see it's very red here, so I would give it more fabric pattern so it's not so tight. This is technically a reason why I would use the the steam brush, not ironing. And if you just add a little bit there and simulate, hopefully it doesn't crash. For the steam brush, like I said, I wouldn't recommend using it for the class, but just a way to do stuff. Oh, I think I did it on the back and not on the front. That probably is why. Come on. I need to get more. I'm just trying to do it quickly. And I think I made it worse. Let me undo both of them. And shrinkage, let me give red. I already did that backwards. Boom, boom, boom. So if you change the shrinkage from negative to positive, it'll either make it more relaxed or more tight. So this, I think, gave more cloth, but it's weird because it got messed up there. But yeah, I think since you have it very tight here, that's a reason that you're getting the stretching. So I wouldn't worry about the stitching, but I would worry about how much pattern you give in the chest area. You got the straps looking nice. These are usually a pain to get right just because they always slide off the breast, and that's why I put this in the assignment, because you got to worry about that as you're creating outfits. Same way goes for like these little gaps between the breast and the straps. You don't want that usually on lower poly model games, just because that's inefficient. So you probably wouldn't even have that in the model. But obviously, like Uncharted games or higher level tier games, you want that because you want to feel layered on top. It makes it more interesting. But yeah, I think it looks good. Same thing what I told Holly, which yours at least you don't have the vertical lines going down, but you might want to add a couple folds right in the elbow pit basically. That fold's nice there. These folds look a little odd. I like it. The only reason I say they look odd is if this is for like an NPC character in a video game at least, multiple characters will probably end up using this. So this looks like something you'll notice repeating. So that's just something I would try to avoid. Yeah, so this is what I mean. So you get the stitching in there. I would personally model this out afterwards to get the stitching to go in the holes and add the round bits in here, and then just leave it how it is. I think you need a little bit more fabric in pretty much the corset area and the chest, just because you want a little bit more folds. And if you don't put more cloth, you're going to get just super tight material, which if that's what you're going for is fine, but you want to use Marvelous obviously to get more folds, blah, 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 and it'll make it look better. Of course, it should be tight leather anyways. And then material like texture to stuff, you would do it in ZBrush or Photoshop, however you want to do the detailing afterwards. But yeah, overall, I think it came out really nice. And then yeah, obviously like the breast, the breast wouldn't naturally be like this when they're in a corset. They'd be pulled together. They'd be different than this. This is more of a natural, well, a little exaggerated natural version of a female chest. So that's why they're a little odd and marvelous, but you'll get used to it as you use it more and create your own avatars. So another reason I could tell it's pretty stretched, pretty tight in the chest area. The seam is getting pulled a lot. Even though your seam line is a little curved here, it's getting pulled really far towards the breast. So Naturally, when you're doing low poly model, you want a nice natural seam on the low poly that you put down the character. So that's where you put a UV seam. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then don't worry about it. But if you know video games and low poly and modeling and stuff like that, you should understand you want a natural seam that'll follow a nice edge flow. But yeah, it looks pretty good. I don't really have much comments besides the chest area and some folds. The armpit's getting a little tight there, a little pinching, which that's the only other comment. Dress looks good though. Dresses almost always look good and marvelous. If you have enough clothing pattern, it's going to work. That's good. Oh, and you have another one. Let me look at the next one. I'm going a little too long on some of these. That part looks good though. That might have been the other one. This looks good. This came out nice. And yeah, so like these kind of folds, there might be a little too much in this area, but I think it's more or less you're trying to get the idea of it rolled up. Yeah, you're trying to get it rolled up. So I would just try to pull these up a little bit further too, but it looks nice. The pockets here look great. Nice detailing. And you can tell the fabric pattern, like this is horizontal, this is vertical. So when you actually, if you mess with textures, you can mess with it in Marvelous, and this is when you would move these around just to get the pattern where you want it. Or technically, when you put the pattern on, you could adjust the pattern on each piece separately, I believe. I never did it because I usually just do it in texture method. Same thing with the chest here, you have to really tight. Just add a little bit more cloth here. I like how you have those overlaying to show the layering there. Looks good. Yeah, this came out really nice. And the dress obviously looks right, and it looks like the reference. Same thing with the breast. The chest is a little bit too busty, so you're not getting this nice perfect V shape. It's turning into more of a U with a sharp bottom. So the idea of this is you want this nice silhouette shape, this kind of this perfect V. Other than that, yeah, it looks good. Good job, Danny. Dum, 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 dum. Let me go on to next person. Danny. And let me go to Nicholas. Easy project. Nicholas. And I don't pick, failed to load. Well, that's not good. Let me read down download your file. Let me see if this works. I remember I got an error when I was exporting files. Yeah. I don't know if I can look at your file. Sorry. It still exports a file. It just doesn't let me open it. If it can't open it, I'll go by your images. Yeah. Sorry, Nicholas. I can't open your file. I don't know if you resubmitted the Nicholas. This from last. Oh, I think you put that in last week. Nicholas. So this week, all I could review is this. I can't look at the pattern, but looks good. The chest area looks pretty solid on this one. So it's not stretching so bad. I wish I had the files. I think other students could download other students' work. So probably would have been nice if they could have tested. They might not be able to. I'm not sure. Sometimes they allow, sometimes they don't. But you got the chest area, so it's not super tight, so you're not getting the stretching as the other person did. I already forgot the name. Who that one was? Danny. Danny's. Obviously, dress looks good. The corset. This looks like the middle strap looks like it's hanging down a little bit, so I might make it a little bit smaller. And you could always just pin that in so it doesn't just uh, flare off of the corset, so it gets a little bit more sticky. The seam line down the arm, I would try to put that more down the inside of the arm, and because it looks like it's hard to tell in the image, but it looks more like it's going down the side of the arm instead of the inside of the arm. Just because you want the seam line to be more hidden. It might just be curving from the armpit around to the front a little bit too much. I would try to move up your pattern here a little bit higher to get a little bit more shape and the fluffiness on the wrist. And maybe give even the shoulder more fluffiness so you get a little bit more folds and tensions there. Straps look good, collar looks good from what I can tell. Yeah, it's pretty solid. Looks good, Nicholas. Thank you, and sorry I couldn't open up your file. Let me read your comment. Yeah, no worries if you run out of time. Like I said, this class is for you. As long as you understand how to make the stuff, you're learning. That's all that really matters. If you never have to do exactly what I teach, just because, like I said, you're paying for the classes. You're just trying to get knowledge out of it. So the idea of the assignments are more or less just taking what you learned from the video and then putting it to use, so you don't forget, and then going forward with your career if you use it or not. But sorry I couldn't open up your file. You could resubmit for next in 2 weeks when I get back for week 4 to review. But I could review it better than if you resubmit the file in that thing. Let me go to Sabrina. Sabrina only sent images. Let me just, I don't see. Basic design for ID. Okay. Let me look at your buttons. So this is your reference. I don't know if that works, so I'm just going to make this bigger. Sorry, I'm just going back and forth really quickly looking at it. I'm going to comment on this shoulder. But it looks good. I feel like their shoulder folds are a little bit lower and it has more of a shape, a U shape that comes back up to the armpit. Yours feel like it's higher on the outside and lower on the inside. And it feels a little bit more clay-like sloppy. So I would try to pull that down and push that up. This might be tighter in the armpit and a little looser out here. So it's more or less adjusting the pattern to accommodate for that. Same with this. This might be an area where you might also want to use elasticity. So you get a little bit more pinching and a little bit more fabric showing. Even, maybe not even use elasticity on this. This just looks a little bit more complicated where this might be a separate piece of cloth stitched in to give you even more folds. Because when you make it one piece, you're not going to get as much of these, the folds as you want. So you might actually want to cut out this midsection and put it into another piece. Unless that's what you did, I just can't tell by the image. Another thing is button down a t-shirt. What I learned, I don't know how accurate this is in the future, in the current state and future, but the idea of the buttons, I don't know which way is which, but the way you button is opposite from male and females. So one side is always like, I forget which one. I think males, the right side is on top of the left side. Or the left side is on top of whichever. And then for females, the opposite way around. The idea was for this where males usually had their wives or significant other button their shirts for them. And so it was opposite for them to be able to do it more naturally. So this is just another thing to keep in mind when you're making clothing. But I think other than that, you nailed it pretty close to that reference. Looks good. I like the inside is white and the outside is black. I don't know if this is dual layered or this is a black, one separate and one separate, or this is laying on top there. Here it looks like you layered it, or you have 2 layered dresses, but that's a nice little detail. So I'm guessing this is how you did your dress. So yeah, this just shows another example on how you do dresses. This is one piece. Like I said, you could do it in 1, 6 pieces, 10 pieces. There's multiple ways to do it. The next week, I think I show you how to do it a different way than this one piece, another way to do it. It's just different ways to keep in mind when you're making patterns. But yeah, it looks good. Yeah, you didn't cut that out in the arm. So even if you don't cut it out in the arm, you could probably just make another sheet and just stitch it into this so it goes on top of here. Just because you don't really need to make it accurate, you could just make it look good and then ignore the inside for now. All right, so this is the underside of this one, I assume, which looks nice. I like the little added detail here, which will never be seen. The buttons look good. I'm not exactly sure your question sim down the skirt. They keep glitching out. Sure to get the buttons to sim down the shirt. I'm not 100% sure on that question. I never had an issue with them keep glitching out. When I used Marvelous heavily back in the day, we didn't even have the new button feature on there. So my experience with the buttons is for a shorter amount of time when I was at my last company, and I never had a big issue with them. But they might have changed something from the last Marvelous I used professionally to the current state of it. So maybe there is a problem with it. Marvelous is constantly updating their version, so this is something that you might just see improve in the future. Sorry, that's the best I can answer that. I'm not exactly sure what you are asking, so hopefully that helps a tiny bit. But yeah, the detail work here, the seam line, this came out really nice. The pattern layout. I just want to show this again so you can see the dress is cut out differently. This is I assume this is the white dress and this is the black dress. So the white inside one, this one is one piece. And this is this piece. Or this piece. So yeah, this is probably the bottom piece, this is the middle piece, and this is the top piece. 1, 2, and 3, and the top waistband, basically. Yeah, looks good. Thanks, Sabrina. Sorry I couldn't answer your question exactly. And feel free to attach an image of what it's doing, so at least that'll help explain it a little bit better to know what you're asking. And then Caldron. Yeah, I'm never gonna pronounce that right. Z project, control I. Caldron. Subdress and normal shirt, subdress and shorts. Here. Should pull down the ending a little too strong. That looks good. Let's see your images. I think all these images are just what attached to the file. And a pillow. I might just need to talk to those ones. Pretty much what I'm seeing now. The other side. Actually, this is the other shirt. All right, so I have everything here. So here's an example where this is probably all too tense right now. If I put on tension viewer, this is probably all red. Even though you made this shorter, the stitching is not getting pulled because it can only pull so much. When this tense, it has issues. So you might have to make this a little bit wider so you can get a little bit more exaggeration on this getting sucked in, pulled in on the belly. The seam line down the shoulder is a nice spot. I like the detail, the little extra added detail on the seam line. Looks good. The folds came out nice here. The same thing I commented earlier on about horizontal folds on the elbow. Wrist looks good. Folds here. Dress looks good. This is one thing where if you put on the thickness viewing, you'll see more of this, where I believe you probably have it. Yeah, you have curved side geometry on, so this is where you might not want it on. On this one and this one. Get out to the mirror. Just because you're seeing that seam line more. But it's only for viewing. Sometimes you can't prevent that. Always. But curved side usually makes up with softer and better. But where it stitches down the middle, you'll see that more, the seam line more naturally. Looks good. The normal thing I say, try to get it down the middle of the body, because right now it looks a little off, but that's natural. Of that happening in Marvel, it's hard to get exactly lined up, so it's easier to fix in Marvels than it is in ZBrush or Maya, but you can still do it however you want. Collar came out nice. I was never a fan of the outfit I chose with the long collars, just what I chose. You got the straps holding pretty firmly on the breast, so it doesn't actually slide over too much. Cross here looks good. And yeah, other than that, I think that looks good. Look at your other one. Oh, I meant to, let's see what this one is first. So this is pretty much the same one. You should short skirt and long skirt. The other one came to the knees. That came to the knees. And this one. Let me read your comment. Oh yeah, so if you already watched the beginning portion of the class, when I think it was Holly I was telling, to just add an internal line and just cut off that excess of the shirt underneath the dress. It's easier to make it work if you're making it for a video game, not making it for an actual clothing company or something like that. Hiding stuff or hacking stuff to make it look better and easier for your future is better, just because the game industry in general is a faster production pipeline, so you just want to get stuff done. So feel free to cut it off. Obviously, you made it work, but yeah, it's perfectly fine if you cut stuff off and you just make it do that. So that's what you mean by cutting off. So I think that's the difference between this file and this file. This shirt came down almost to the crotch, and this one, yeah, you have it in here. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. But like I said, you could use the little square up here, the second one, pin the bottom area where you cut it off so they stay where they are when you simulate, so you don't have it slowly falling out. But yeah, that was it. Yeah, good. Looks good. I like it. Everybody's learning fairly quickly. Everything's coming out nice. I'm using Marvelous correctly. So the last person I have is Glynis. I'm bad. Sorry. I only uploaded the Z-Pack, so I created the shared Google file. I didn't download the file yet, so let me download that. Oh, I don't know that password. Sorry. Yeah, I need to request access. I don't think I can get this in time. Let me look at your stuff first. Well, dress all layered and torn detail. I never actually did much with torn cloth in Marvelous, which is pretty cool. Overskirts, additional layers. This came out nice. You see another example where you do several different layers of it. Looks good. Let me open up your file. The one file I have is a Z-Pack or Z project. Z-Pack. Three. Oh, this is. She got an, just reading your comment. She got an additional waistband with lots of puckering as well as sash draped around the, which hangs down. What's the best way to create such an item so that each not this? They probably don't have the right avatar. Oh, my computer does not like this. It's reading everything badly. It's not ambient. Let me turn down that. My computer's definitely not liking this. All right, that's a little bit better for me. Sorry, I'm just gonna add a new material. Translucency is cool, but apparently my computer does not like that. There you go. I've seen other people do torn cloth and Marvelous. It's a little bit more time consuming. It gets a little messy. I prefer to do it in ZBrush, but I did see it before. I never did it. I just find it easier for myself to use ZBrush, plus I have more control. Yeah, the layering, I had a feeling that I was clipping in on itself, so you might actually have to use the layering feature for something like this. Oh, it's not letting me select. No. The main base of that is firm, and so I create an additional center around that. Try and freeze that. She got an additional waistband with a lot of puckering as well as a sash draped around that which hangs down. What's the best way to create an item? The main of the is firm and cylindrical. This is the problem with that. So yeah, I would use layering on this just because it's getting a little difficult where they're clipping in on each other. I don't think you're gonna be able to solve it with just Marvelous hoping it works. So this might be in a situation where you have to do it. So just choose your layering. Obviously you have it laid out here, so you could do layer 1, 2, 3, or 4, whichever way you go. But the way you did the waistband where you just made it stiff, very tight, that's how I would do it. I would actually make that first and move exactly how I wanted with the pins up here. Then I would freeze it. Well, I would turn off the pin, simulate it very quickly, turn off the simulation, then freeze it so it has more of a natural look to it. And then I would stitch everything into that. And if you needed that tight part to be a little bit loose, I would actually stitch in clothing on top of that. Duplicate the waistband, scale it up, and stitch the seam in on top and bottom. So I don't have your avatar in here, but where is this? So I would get this, which I think is the whole piece, and you could do layer clone over, and then I would scale this. Come on. Scale this up. When you do layer clone over, it auto stitches it in here. And if you freeze that, when you simulate, this will just get more folds on it. So if you need to do something like that, I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking or what you were going to ask in the other question, but this is how I would do it. I would do layers and put this on, leave this frozen, put a cloth on top of it, just so you have a firm base underneath that everything's hooked to. Yeah, so I think you're right on number one. That's what I would do. Two, to create the inner horizontal puckers and gathering without a misshape the main waist clincher. Should I create this on a cylinder on the ground so the gatherings are easier instead of the vertical here? To create inner horizontal puckers gathering, misshaping the main waist cincher. There's lots of puckering. A lot of wasting, a lot of puckering. I think I'm gonna waist down, oversteer. So I would do exactly what you have, and then I would add if you're adding these straps in, I would add those. This is when I would probably use the avatar pins and then create that, and so you could loop this around easily. What I would do is add a strap that is very tight, very loose, then slowly keep conforming it closer and closer to the body by scaling it smaller and smaller around it. And then I would put this on a higher layer. And there, it takes a little fudgery in my on my idea, where what I would do is I would make the skirt a lot longer than it should be and pull it up, get this top one, then do the next one, and then pull it up, pull cloth out from there, and then do the next one, pull cloth out. And whatever's left you have, whatever cloth you have left, then you could just make it shorter because it'll just remove from the bottom. It's hard to add. It's easier to remove than add cloth folds from the length of it. So that's what I would do if that's what you're asking. But yeah, it's going to be difficult. It's doable in Marvelous. It's just going to take some patience, just like when I showed you the example on the scarf. This is a good case where if you make it too tight, it's going to eat in on itself, and it's not going to have that there anymore. So that's why I would highly recommend using layers for something like this. Horizontal puckers gathering with the mishap. I'm assuming puckers gathering, you mean the strap without it missshaping the main character. Should I create this in the cylinder on the ground? That's what I kind of answered. The hanging sash is fully attached, draped around the waist cincher, as well as hanging out. I could achieve this when the additional waist cincher was frozen away from the body, but when I would simulate the waist cincher pieces and sash simultaneously, either the waist cincher wouldn't properly surround the avatar before bunching, and or the hanging sash would pull away from the waist. Hopefully you don't even have it in the scene, the other thing. Hanging sash is fully attached, draped around the waist, hanging down. I could achieve this with additional waist cincher was frozen away from the body, but when I would simulate the waist cincher pieces and sash simultaneously, either the waist cincher wouldn't probably simulate. This would probably be a case where I would make what you have now, freeze everything, then make the other piece, the sash going around it, and then simulate it. Then I would unfreeze it, put layering on the top sash and on the bottom sash, then simulate it. It also might be a part where I don't stitch it in exactly where everything else is stitched in. I've added an internal line here on the front and the back, and then stitch it into there. You could add it very close to the line, but I wouldn't stitch it in the same one because that might actually cause problems. I think that's what you're asking about. I think that answers everything, but that's what I would do for the sash. I think it's coming out great, but I would definitely do layering. So this is a little bit more complicated where I would use layering. Marvelous isn't a fan of the layering anymore, at least from what I learned from using different versions of Marvelous as time went on. But I think this would be a good reference for it. So I would do the first layer, the second layer, I don't know which one's which. This is probably the inner one. This is probably the second one. This is probably the second one. So I probably put this as like one. Should give me the warning, which I never say don't show again. They just always like it. And then this is probably the third one. This is 0, 1, 2. And then I put this at 3. I don't know if I have an edge on here. Yeah, I can't simulate it. One thing in Marvelous, I would avoid it touching the ground. If you're going to do the reference of this character kind of like cinched up at the top, tied up, I would pull this character up higher, or you could technically go into the scene over here. Avatar simulation property, I believe it's under ground plane, and I would turn off the collision. This will be beneficial in this case just because instead of raising everything up, you could lower everything down so the clothing is actually draping down. So this is what I would do for that. And the layering for that, and then I told you about the waist and the torn clothing. Yeah, this is more of a personal preference how you would do it. There's no easy way in Marvelous, in my opinion, to do it. I might actually just do where I stitch in the piece, which you might have just stitched. Yeah, you just stitch them in. But after you get folds how you like it, you can just keep adding different, the pin, not the pins, I call them vertexes because it's just what I'm used to. The curve point, they say added pattern, the points. I guess it just add point. But in 3D, I would call it vertex. I would just keep adding vertex and just rip it up manually. But I would make sure to do that at the very end to make it look torn. Right now, this looks like lacing added on. So that's what I would try to avoid. But yeah, it looked good. I don't have any other feedback on that. I think that answers everybody's questions. Let me just run over week 4 really quick before all classes. Week 4. So I'm going to be out of town for a couple days, so that's why I'm not going to be able to do the Q&A next week. That's why the week 4 is actually a 2-week session, which is fine because it's one of the harder weeks to get through because it's more complicated pattern. But this week you'll be doing the male pants and the male shirt. Feel free, like always, to not go one-to-one to my reference, but feel free to do it. It'll show you different techniques here and there. All of it is useful to learn, in my opinion. I say this all the time, blah. But yeah, I really think it's useful to learn all the different little tricks and the hacks that I learned over time. So some of these you might not even use anymore because they added new features in Marvelous. But knowing they exist and how I just figure stuff out to make it work within my time schedule was what I did. And you can still do that going forward with any of the Marvelous. So it's really just figuring out the best way you can do it with the tools you are given and make it work. And then besides the male clothing, there's a layering video on different ways. I believe I talk about the dress at this point and how I put on, I think I talk about how I sometimes put them in separate scenes or I freeze stuff and stuff like that. That week should go fairly smooth, so should be a fun week. Last note, after next week, after the following assignment, you're going to go on week 5, which is the last week. Week 5 is a very technical week. I just want to say it now. I threw one clothing pattern in just because it's Marvel class. I still want to talk about clothing. It wasn't anything crazy. I just want to show off one last feature that I remembered. But week 5 overall is going through the animation in Marvelous fairly quickly, just showing that it exists and how it works. Now they have it a little bit easier to export in. The way I'm doing it, I use a plugin, but now I believe you could just export everything out as an FBX and it works. It also shows a very specific way to get Z-Remesher working for you to make thickness in ZBrush and keep your subdivisions. I use this technique a lot for anything I work on, so that's why I highly recommend to use this feature. But that's week 5, so that's 2 weeks away. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to message, to email me. I could answer emails because I'll be out of town, but I won't be able to access the site, I don't believe. So if you have an urgent question or request, please email me instead of messaging on the forum. But if you message on the forum, I'll respond. It'll be very late after when I return. Other than that, feel free, like always, message me if you have any questions, concerns. If you have any other things, feel free to post it on there. Yeah. Other than that, that covers week 3, and hope you guys learn as much as you can and everything's going out well. Yeah. So I'll catch you later. Thanks for showing up, Holly, and thanks everybody for turning in their assignment. It looks good. So thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. Bye-bye. Thanks for staying. Adios.